tutorial for the Potomac Bead Company. This is the bracelet that we will be making for our project today. And this bracelet uses the Potomac exclusive IrisDuo beads. In this bracelet we have two colors of the IrisDuo beads. There's one color that runs along the center of the bracelet, and then there's a different color that runs along the sides of the bracelet. For our project today, I will be using the brass gold IrisDuos along the center of the bracelet, and then for the sides of the bracelet I will be using the metallic gold color for the IrisDuos. In addition to the IrisDuos, this bracelet has the Potomac exclusive DiscDuos, and those beads run along the center of the bracelet. For our project today I will be using the Crystal GT Sandalwood color. This project also has 11/0 seed beads and 8/0 seed beads. For our 11/0 seed beads, I will be using the Duracoat Galvanized Dark Mauve. And for our 8/0 seed beads, I'll be using the Duracoat Galvanized Light Cranberry. For our clasps for our bracelet, we have a cut button, and I'll be using the Amber Picasso color. This is a 2-needle project. So we'll need 2 size 12 beading needles, and in addition to our beading needles we'll need some beading thread, and I'll be using the Wildfire .006 in the white or frost color. To cut down and burn my thread ends, I'll be using my thread zap. Okay, so let's get started on our project. To start off our project, we'll want to work with a comfortable length of beading thread. I have about 3 yards of beading thread. On one end of the thread I place one needle, and on the other end of the thread I place my other needle. To begin, we'll want to pick up 3 11/0 seed beads with one needle. We'll then pick up our cut button by placing one needle through one hole and the other needle through the other hole. And then we'll center the cut button and those 11/0 seed beads on our beading thread. With each needle, we'll pick up 3 11/0 seed beads. And we'll let those beads drop down. Now we'll pick up a DiscDuo. We'll place one needle through one hole and the other needle through the other hole of the DiscDuo, and we'll let that drop down. With each needle, we'll pick up one 11/0 seed bead. And now we'll pick up an IrisDuo. One needle will go through one hole, and then the other needle will go through the other hole of the IrisDuo. And let those beads drop down. Now the IrisDuos we're picking up now are for the center of your bracelet. So if you're using 2 colors of IrisDuos, we'll want to pick up the ones that we're using for the center of our bracelet. From here we'll pick up an 11/0 seed bead on each needle. And now we'll pick up a DiscDuo. One needle will go through one hole and the other needle will go through the other hole. With each needle we'll pick up one 11/0 seed bead. And now we'll pick up an IrisDuo. One needle will go through one hole and the other needle will go through the other hole. We want to make sure we're picking up our IrisDuo so that they're all laying up with the puffy side up. And we're basically going to repeat the pattern of picking up an 11/0 seed bead on each needle, followed by a DiscDuo. Then we'll pick up an 11/0 seed bead, followed by an IrisDuo. And we want to repeat this pattern for the length of our bracelet. Once we get towards the end of our bracelet, we'll want to make sure that we end our bracelet with a DiscDuo bead, similar to how we started. So go ahead and continue adding your beads for the length of the bracelet that you'll need. Once we have the length of the bracelet that we'll need, and we're ending with a DiscDuo, we'll add the loop for our clasp. On each needle, we'll pick up 2 11/0 seed beads. And we'll let those beads drop down. We'll pick up one. Oh, I have 3 on this one. We'll just need 2 11/0 seed beads on each needle. We'll pick up 1 8/0 seed bead with 1 needle, and then we'll cross through that same 8/0 seed bead with our other needle going in the opposite direction. We'll then pick up the beads for our loop. For our loop, we're going to be picking up 26 11/0 seed beads. So we're picking up those seed beads with 1 needle right now. Okay, I am going to double check my count. Now that we have our 26 11/0 seed beads, we want to come back through this 8/0 seed bead that our threads cross through. So we'll be coming back through that 8/0 seed bead. And that will form our loop. With the same needle, we'll come back down through these 2 11/0 seed beads. And then we'll go through the DiscDuo and the next 11/0 seed bead. We'll place this needle to the side for a moment. With our other needle, we're going to reinforce our loop. So we'll go through all these beads again. And we want to make sure that we're not skipping any beads. Once we go through all the beads in a loop, we're going to go back through the 8/0 seed bead that our threads cross through. And then we'll go back down through those two 11/0 seed beads. We'll also go through our DiscDuo and then the next 11/0 seed bead. We'll want to pull our threads tight on both sides of our beadwork. Okay, I'm going to put that needle to the side, and then working with our other needle, we'll want to pick up an 11/0, an 8/0, and then an 11/0, and we're going to come back through this 11/0 seed bead that our thread is now exiting. So we'll come back through that 11/0, and that will form a little picot on our beadwork. We're going to go through the next IrisDuo and the next 11/0 seed bead that follows the IrisDuo. Here again, we're going to pick up an 11/0, an 8/0, and then an 11/0, and we're going to come back through this 11/0 seed bead. And this is what you'll have. We'll sew down through this next DiscDuo and then the 11/0 that follows it. And again, we're going to pick up an 11/0, an 8/0 seed bead, and then an 11/0, and we're going to go back through this 11/0 that our thread is now exiting. We'll go through the next IrisDuo bead, and then we'll go through the next 11/0 following it. So we're going to continue adding these little right angle weave units, or these picots, along the sides of this of the bracelet right here. On the other side, we'll be doing the same thing. We're going to pick up an 11/0, an 8/0, and then an 11/0, and we're going to come back through the 11/0 seed bead our thread is now exiting. We'll sew through the next IrisDuo and that next 11/0 as well. We'll pick up an 11/0, an 8/0, and then an 11/0. And we're going to go sew back through the 11/0 that our thread is now exiting. We'll sew through the next DiscDuo and then the next 11/0 following it. So we want to continue adding these seed beads for the length of the bracelet. Now that we've added these picot units along the sides of our bracelet, the last one on each side will be right before the last DiscDuo. What we want to do now is actually reinforce our cup button. So working with one needle, Right now I'm going to be working with the left needle. My thread is exiting from the 11OC bead that's right before this DiscDuo. I'm going to go up through that DiscDuo and then up through the three 11OC beads that follows it. And go around my cup button through these 11 O's. And then back down through the 11O seed beads on the other side. We'll come down through that DiscDuo. We're going to go through this 11O seed bead that's a part of our picot unit. So the one that's off to the side, the one that's closest to our DiscDuo, we're going to go through that 11O seed bead. And then we'll go through the 8O seed bead. And this will get us in position to begin adding the IrisDuos on the side of our bracelet. I'm going to put this needle to the side for a moment. We'll pick up our other needle and reinforce our cup button. Right now we're exiting from the DiscDuo on this side. We'll go up through these 3 11O seed beads and we'll go up and around our cup button. Go back down through the 11O seed beads on this side and then back down through that DiscDuo. We're going to come over to this 11O that's on the side, that's part of our little picot unit. And then we'll go through our 8O seed bead. Now we're in position on both sides to begin adding the side IrisDuos. Here we want to pick up one IrisDuo bead and we're just going to go right through, so through the next 8O seed bead on this side. We'll pick up another IrisDuo bead and we'll sew through the next 8O seed bead on this side. Pick up an IrisDuo bead and sew through the next 8O seed bead. On the other side, we're going to do the same thing. Right now, we're exiting that first 8O seed bead. We're going to pick up an IrisDuo bead and sew through the next 8O seed bead. Pick up an IrisDuo bead and sew through the next 8O seed bead. We want to make sure our IrisDuo beads are all facing up. We'll pick up an IrisDuo bead and then sew through the next 8O seed bead. So continue adding the IrisDuo beads along both sides of our bracelet. Once we complete adding our IrisDuos along the sides of our bracelet, With our threads now exiting that last 8/0 seed bead on both sides, with one needle, we want to pick up 2 11/0 seed beads and 1 8/0 seed bead. And then we're going to sew back through the second hole of the same or this last IrisDuo bead on this side of the beadwork. Here we want to pick up an 8/0, and then we'll sew through the next, the second hole of the next IrisDuo bead on this side. Now we'll begin to add our spiral stitch on the side of the bracelet as we go down. So we'll pick up 3 11/0 seed beads, 2 8/0 seed beads, and then 3 11/0 seed beads. Let those beads drop down. We want to go back to the previous IrisDuo bead, not the one we're exiting, but the one before that. And we're going to sew through that IrisDuo. We'll sew through the 8/0 seed bead, and then we'll sew through the next IrisDuo, the one that our thread is now exiting. And that will form a small loop on the sides of those two IrisDuos. Here we'll pick up an 8/0 seed bead, and we'll sew through the second hole of the next IrisDuo bead. Now we want to pick up the beads for our next loop. We'll pick up 3 11/0 seed beads, 2 8/0 seed beads, and then 3 11/0 seed beads. We're going to go back to the previous IrisDuo bead, so not the one our thread is exiting. We'll go back to the one before that. We're going to come through that IrisDuo bead. We'll go through this 8/0 seed bead, and then we'll come through the IrisDuo bead our thread is now exiting. And that will form our next loop. Again, pick up an 8/0 seed bead, go through the second hole of the next IrisDuo bead. We'll pick up 3 11/0 seed beads, 2 8/0 seed beads, and then 3 11/0 seed beads. We're going to go back to the previous IrisDuo bead. We'll go through that IrisDuo bead, through the 8/0 seed bead, and then through the IrisDuo bead our thread is now exiting. And that will form our next loop. And we want to make sure that our loops, as they that they sit on top of the previous one. I'm going to put this needle to the side, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So we'll pick up our needle and begin working on that side. We'll pick up 2 11/0 seed beads, 1 8/0 seed bead, and we're going to come through the second hole of the IrisDuo bead on the end here, and we'll pull. We'll pick up an 11/0 seed bead. We'll go through the second hole of the next IrisDuo bead. Here we want to do our first loop, so we'll pick up 3 11/0 seed beads, 2 8/0 seed beads, and then 3 11/0 seed beads. We're going to go back to the previous IrisDuo bead. We're going to go through that IrisDuo bead, through the 8/0 seed bead, and then through the IrisDuo bead our thread is now exiting. That will form our first loop on that side. We'll pick up an 8/0 bead, go through the second hole of the next IrisDuo bead. We'll pick up 3 11/0 seed beads, 2 8/0 seed beads, and then 3 more 11/0 seed beads. Let those beads drop down. We want to go to the previous, back to the previous IrisDuo bead. We're going to go through that IrisDuo bead. We're go through the 8/0 seed bead that follows it, and then through the IrisDuo bead our thread is now exiting, and pull to form our second loop. And we want to make sure that second loop sits on top of the first loop. So we want to make sure our loops are sitting the same way on both sides of the beadwork. Again, we'll pick up an 8/0 seed bead and go through the second hole of the next IrisDuo bead. We'll pick up 3 11/0 seed beads, 2 8/0 seed beads, and then 3 11/0 seed beads. We'll go back to the previous IrisDuo bead. We'll go through that IrisDuo bead, go through the 8/0 seed bead that follows it, and then through the IrisDuo bead that our thread is now exiting. And that will form our next loop, and it'll sit on top. It'll sit atop or above the previous loop. So what we want to do is continue adding our 8/0 seed beads in between our IrisDuos, and then adding our loops along both sides of the beadwork until we reach the end of our bracelet. So as we are finishing adding the 8/0 seed beads and our spiral loops on the side of our bracelet, we want to finish off the end by adding a few more seed beads on this end IrisDuo, and then we'll sew down through the beadwork, making a few knots along the way, and then tying off and ending our thread. I've already gone ahead and done that on this side of the bracelet. On this side of the bracelet, we're at the point where I need to add the last spiral loop. So I'll go ahead and sew through the previous IrisDuo, sew through the 8/0 seed bead, and then sew through the IrisDuo our thread is now exiting, and that will complete the loops on this side of the bracelet. Here we want to pick up an 8/0 seed bead, 2 11/0 seed beads, and we want to sew through the 8/0 seed bead on the other side of this IrisDuo bead, this last IrisDuo bead. We're going to go back through this 8/0 seed bead that's right next to the first hole of that IrisDuo. And that will finish off the end of our bracelet right there. I'm going to sew through this 8/0 seed bead. And we'll tie a knot right here. I'll sew down through an IrisDuo and 8/0, and then the next IrisDuo and 8/0. I'm just going to sew down through this line of the beadwork, and I'll tie a knot along the way. Just going to sew through a couple more beads and tie a few more knots, and then I'll go ahead and end my thread. I did have to add thread as I was going along, adding the loops on the side, so that's why we have these extra strings here as I added thread. You may need to add thread to your project as you go along, and I just added thread as I needed to each needle. So I'll continue adding some knots, kind of using up some more of this thread. And once I get to a point where I'm ready to tie off and end my thread, we'll tie 2 knots. I think I'll do that right here. I'll go to the back of my beadwork, and here I'll end the thread, and we're going to burn down the ends. I'll also go ahead and burn down the ends for the where I added the thread. Okay. And now our bracelet is completed. Here's what the bracelet looks like when you place it on. This one is just a tidbit big on me. I usually like my bracelets more snug around my wrists. I do have another one that actually fits a little bit better, so that's one colorway for this bracelet design. Here's another colorway in the aluminum silver IrisDuos down the middle, and then we have the hematite, jet hematite DiscDuos and IrisDuos along the side. And this one is much better fit on me. Very pretty color, the black and silver. And then we have the bracelet that I originally showed at the beginning. These are all different sizes, and the length will depend on the size you need. Okay, so that is our project for today. I hope you enjoyed this design, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for watching.